Every single time polling has come out in the past couple of years in relation to immigration attitudes, Scottish people share the same attitudes towards immigration as their English counterparts. But you'd never know that if you listen to the shit that comes out of Nicola Thin Lips and her camp. And the same can be said here for this video. I thought I was watching a woman who was devoid of self-awareness, but didn't take me too long to figure out it was the proverbial feminist fucking arrogance on full display. But of course, it goes one better than that, because she happens to be an academic anti-racist. What a shock! Calling for system change. In and around the crybaby routine of how oppressed or marginalised brown and blacks are. I really don't give a fuck anymore. I am so sick of the way that we are being talked about. Our demographic replacement, bold as brass in this video, which I'll play in a second. And there's no mention as to what we have to say about it. Oh no. We just need to talk about what needs to be done now for the people that are here, that we don't want to see.
Session on system change within policy making, and I think it's really right that I'm here because that actually has been the focus of my work for well over 15 years. In that time, Scotland's demography has fundamentally changed forever.
In the past 15 years, our demography has changed forever. Were we asked, what about our opinion on this? Do we get a say in the matter? Ah no, because the SNP rule the roost in Scotland these days. And just because we don't have full devolved powers at our disposal, they've done a pretty damn good job of ensuring our demography's changed.
And continues to do so. The proportion of people of colour, of migrants out with the UK, coming from out with the UK, living in Scotland, has doubled in each census since 1990, reaching 12% in 2011. 21% of children at primary school in Glasgow in 2014 come from a migrant or a black and minority ethnic.
Oh, it's so great, the diversity, it's the cohesion, wow. So beautiful, so enriching. Look at all those fruit pickers. Hey, Benny boy? But no, seriously. So she's standing there at her podium, talking about every single census, the demography's changing. The ethnic minorities are increasing in number, but yet the Scottish people are declining. Now, why is that? Birth rates? Well, we know that's an issue. But is it a case of they're outbreeding us? Or is it that there's just too many of them coming in at one sitting? Regardless of what it is, the point is, we were never asked. We're ignored, essentially marginalised if we dare open our mouths. Because we need to talk about compassion. We need to talk about how there's a patriarchy and the barriers, and we need to eradicate the said barriers. White man bads. We need to talk about marginalisation. We need to talk about what we're going to do in the fact that Glasgow's primary school demographic, 21% of them are from an ethnic minority background or a migrant background. And that's something to be proud of. Is it aye? That's something that people can safely say is something we can be proud of. Maybe if you're from an ethnic minority background, you might think that that's something to smile about. But quite frankly,
ethnic background. And Glasgow's overall population is expected to reach 19% by 2031. Long-standing communities of colour have been complemented in recent years by the arrival of migrants from EU and other countries, some of which are refugees and asylum seekers. These changes have broadly been welcomed by Scottish Government, which has
not by the public, by the government.
A strongly pro-migration policy position.
Despite the public disagreeing fundamentally.
With Scotland's changing demography comes a diversity of cultures.
Oh, well, that's a good thing. Well, I can rest easier tonight knowing that our changing demography, at the very least, will bring our diverse cultures. What a great thing to strive for. Let's demographically fuck up Scotland, because when it's all said and done, we'll have diverse cultures. How great. How great. Yes. Fuck off, man.
Perspectives, attitudes, and...
It gets better. We'll have diverse perspectives. Wow. Why didn't we think of this sooner? Scotland was an ethno-state for hundreds of years, but they didn't know what they were missing out on. Think of all the diverse perspectives they could have. Wow. Why aren't China and all that implementing similar policies? Why isn't the African continent diversified? Think of all the perspectives they could have. Think of all the cultures they could be sharing together. Oh, we need to accommodate them all.
And potential.
Oh, and the potential. I don't give a fuck about their potential.
First began working with these newly migrated to Scotland, I actually believed that the system of engagement with people's experiences would be able to accommodate these diverse perspectives. That has not proved the case. After about 10 years ago, I began to examine and investigate the system itself.
Oh, how convenient.
Scotland's Community Empowerment Act 2015 recognised the range of communities, the need for a range of communities to do more for themselves and have more say in decisions that affect them.
So they need to have more say in decisions that affect them, but yet we don't have a say in the decisions that affect us, like the demographic change that you just spoke of. We need to implement policies to accommodate people we didn't ask for in the first place, while our voices are ignored and sidelined. It's not a lack of self-awareness on display, because this is a standard running theme at the feminist circle jerks. White man bad, oppression, patriarchy, barriers, discrimination, the fucking works.
A range of civic initiatives have sought to enhance the voice and agency for different communities.
Except our own.
Including the Poverty Truth Commission, the Care Commission for Looked After Children, and the Gender Pay Equality within Policy and Service Planning. Despite the efforts of third sector organisations, the perspectives of people of colour in Scotland are often unheard.
And what about our perspective? I'm sorry, but even if there was any truth to what this woman is saying right now, the fact that the same courtesy is not directed our way, to the Scottish people's way, why should any courtesy be shown her way? It's just unbelievable. Unless you're an SNP fanboy, or unless you're some communist.
With people of colour significantly underrepresented in decision-making fora, including public services, local authorities, and Scottish Parliament itself.
Oh, yeah.
My work...
So because there's not a black woman or a black man in Parliament, that somehow indicates a lack of representation. They're not being thought of in the decision-making process. The Parliament's full of white people, and they seem to have no issue implementing policies that benefit the ethnic minority communities, so I don't know what you're fucking complaining about.
As an academic, is therefore with communities of colour in Scotland, long-standing, well-established communities and the more recent migrants,
that we didn't ask for.
Those who often become racialised within society.
Those who become racialised, meaning of course whiteness. So there's a subtle little jab. Race doesn't exist. Whiteness theory, white privilege, we racialise all these individuals.
When I say that I work with communities, I mean I actually position myself as an academic with them in the community organisations.
Right.
I view the academy, the academic space, as having the potential to become an enabler, a conduit through which, if carefully managed, those who develop evidence through research for policy and practice decisions can be supported through the research process to engage with the people they are making policy about. I work at Glasgow Caledonian University, whose mission incorporates ambitions as working towards the common good. I have managed over the years within that organisation to navigate a place and a space for me to do this work. And that has been so important for the learning both about how to get that space and then what to do with it. I go to lots of meetings and get-togethers in the evenings, hear about people's hopes and their thinking, and engage with the huge expertise. And this isn't just obviously just about migrants, it's just I happen to be working with migrants, but the huge expertise communities have amassed to navigate, protect and sustain themselves within this increasingly hostile environment.
Here we go.
When I say hostile environment, I mean...
I don't actually mean hostile environment, because we're talking about a Tory party that was letting in record levels of non-EU migrants year on year. We're referring to a Windrush scandal, of course, but it's fun to repeat hostile environment over and over and over again, to beat the white man over the fucking head with your racist tropes, or accusations anyway.
Increasingly hostile environment towards generally towards black and brown people and those migrated.
It's white people, see what I mean? It's white people and their negative attitudes towards black and brown people. Well, maybe if you took your head out your arse for a little second here and listened to what you've just read out to your feminist audience, you might understand something. But again, it comes down to arrogance, doesn't it? You have just talked about demographics being irreversible. Demographics forever changed. You're now talking about blacks and browns. So it stands to reason they're the people that have changed the demography of the country. So when the people of the country that are native continuously get ignored, marginalised, sidelined and whatnot, in order to pander to the people that we didn't invite in the first place, stands to reason there might be a bit of tension that begins to rise, especially when it becomes a two-tier system, whether it's a fucking hate crime legislation for Muslims, or if it's hate crimes protecting blacks and all the other little poor oppressed minorities in this country, far white fucking men.
As well as the specific hostile environment department in Westminster, which has a serious effect on the day-to-day lives of people of colour.
Oh, they just can't get by because life's so hard. Well, I've got a solution. Fuck off then. You keep coming over and more come over here, but we're so racist. Oh, they're so hard done by the little microaggressions really get to them.
And people who have migrated towards Scotland. This can be in accessing health and resources, irrespective that Scotland itself has taken a different stance.
No, the government has taken a different stance. And the end result? A population that's changing and the public being ignored. And a thin-lipped First Minister bragging about it.
Both policy-wise and narrative-wise, immigration is still controlled by Westminster, and the effect remains
that really gets to Sturgeon.
Situated in the everyday experience of people who have come here, and that is the intention of the hostile environment.
What do you suggest we do?
So, what do? I work with communities to develop research projects and bids with them. These are often relatively small bids. There is little prestige about this in academic terms, yet doing this work together, we aim to demonstrate to those decision makers in policy and research and practice that the expertise communities can hold of the issues they experience is the knowledge and the expertise that needs to be incorporated in a much more authoritative and direct way into policy, research, practice and service planning. Processes needs careful examination before we determine what it is we seek to understand. These are the decision-making spaces where people of colour, people of racialised are often not.
People of racialised, people of colour. I mean, just...
Their input is traditionally in focus groups with communities who can end up feeling co-opted into rubber stamping research and policy protocols. In interview data, often that data collection is not even led by people of colour. The system does not often give the authority to those racialised to inform the decisions made about them. Migrants, communities of colour are completely over-researched, and yet there is so little understanding that the issues that affect them do so in a particular way because...
So overly researched, coming from the woman who's referring to them as racialised, indicating to me anyway, that she's done some sort of course on whiteness theory. Oh, what a nerve.
Often racialised within the system. And that, in my view, is why I am here in this moment today. This, I would suggest, is a very small yet important part of the much wider global understanding about identity, about belonging, about rights represented in activist movements such as Me Too, Decolonising the Academy, Black Lives Matter, those demanding
whites don't know, eh?
In climate change action, and the myriad of small and large attempts across the world to rethink how we are engaging together. Whose voice is heard?
By communists.
When and in what spaces? Scotland, in the broadest context, in this particular moment, is attempting to reposition itself and to rethink these processes. It is spurred on, in my particular area, because of its particular stance towards Brexit, the EU, and of course wider Trump. And importantly,
3 issues that derive from Sturgeon, the SNP and their progressive bullshits. That's not representative of the public in this country.
it is slowly beginning to own its own difficult emigrant history. All these factors contribute.
We're well aware of our history. It's you people who are ignorant if you assume that we don't know our own history. We don't need reprehensible characters like yourself to come here and dictate policy to us and tell us what we need to know, what we should be doing and how we should be fucking acting. Fuck man, this video's boiling my...
Growing national narrative and
our growing national narrative. It's not our national narrative, you progressive fuck.
understanding about ourselves as a country.
You aren't Scottish.
Policymakers and government officials in Scotland. In my view, we have relatively easy access, and as an academic, it is where I have positioned my efforts, because for the sorts of work I do, it is where the power and the influence to have conversations with those in power lies. So just quickly, some of the things to think about when you're rethinking policy and about policy coherence.
Black Lives Matter.
What I've found is that often across sectors was that the only people to pay to attend, not paid to participate in research or evidence gathering, were the very people we need to hear from, the community. So that needs serious attention and changes made in who is funded to participate, whose knowledge and expertise is valued, costed and paid for. The power differentials need managed.
Power are you talking about?
Those spaces, and I have personally looked to the creative sector and developed mechanisms to support that. Migration or research or policy development with communities of colour, we need to remain alert to the fact that the language we use around race and racism changes as our understanding changes, and that we need careful.
Because the curriculum is teaching people, teachers and children alike, that the new norm is race doesn't exist. Whiteness theory is the new hot topic of the day. Hence the word critical race theory.
Critical thinking about that language as it will impact on what we produce. But the reason that came about, I'm telling you about, is a sort of for you to reflect on how whole systems can be set up without including the perspectives of those who are not there at the decision-making table.
And can the same not be said about the native people of this country that are being demographically replaced, much to your delight?
Communities I work with who are so very visible and yet often invisible in
Women can't talk, man.
decision-making. I say to people here that in migration forces change. That is the point. That is, in my view, the potential within it.
Well, I'll fucking speak for itself, man.
And it is for us to work with it, not against it, and welcome that change. And
change that wouldn't be occurring if the government weren't implementing said change. You're acting as if this is a natural phenomenon.
Always begin with those who are marginalised to investigate what actually happens from their perspective, and to understand what knowledge they bring of their own experiences, and importantly focus on how those in power, those with authority, be supported to understand the need to relinquish their perspective and enable others to come in. I therefore have focused on what enables or restricts participation of people of colour, of migrants and those marginalised, what enables diverse perspectives and experiences to influence policy and practice decision-making process, what enables diverse perspectives to be in there. Migration forces change in society, and the learning which I bring to the circle has been because years ago I was forced to rethink my own work as an academic and my approaches to participation within the academy, because of those I work with. The conception of aligning this work within gender is in its very really early stages. It's a really exciting opportunity to bring the work which has been developed within migration into this broader context of gender equality. It's systemic change we all know is needed. This has been quite fast for me, actually, but once more thinking has been done, it will be shared with all the Circle members. So I'm excited to see how this is going to unfold in 2020. And so on that note, I'm just going to thank the First Minister again, and to Louise and colleagues within the Circle, and I look forward to working with this in 2020. Thank you.
Oh, I can't wait to